Hello, everyone, and welcome to another section of our Disabled Lawyer and Proud campaign video. Today with me, I have got Mr. Daniel Holt, who is a very good friend of mine. But more importantly, he is a pupil barrister at 39 Essex Chambers. He's also the founding chair of the Association of Disabled Lawyers, which was the first independent pan-professional organisation of people working and studying in law with impairments and physical and mental health conditions. Daniel was educated in a special needs school and is a seasoned disability rights activist. He's engaged with the Bar Standards Board, the Legal Services Board, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and many other organisations to help improve the experiences of lawyers and students with health conditions. He currently serves as Middle Temple Young Barristers Association Diversity and Inclusion Officer, as well as sitting on all bar and human rights lawyers association committees. He's also a member of the advisory committee at Picture Academy. Daniel likes to play football for Sale United and Greenwich and can be found regularly at Muscleworks Gym. Hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm fine. I realise I should call you Daniel. I do apologise. It's like, you know, too much of a connection going on.
Everybody who works with me, I get no calls because
Well, that's what we see you as. So thanks for doing this interview. Obviously, this is quite fun for you because you're usually in my seat asking the questions. But today it's all about you. So why don't we kick off with our first question, which is, what does being disabled mean to you?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you could say it means everything, but at the same time, it means nothing. Because it means nothing because it's not what particularly defines the person that I am, but it also means everything because it impacts the way I interact with the entire outside world. So it affects you on a very obvious basis. It affects my relationship with my government system in terms of eligibility requirements for certain support. My government's duties towards me are different. The way the government publishes me as a member of what a valuable member of society is probably different. It affects my connection with education, where we're giving adequate provision or lack of in education. It affects my bargaining power as an individual because many buildings aren't accessible. So I might not be able to get into my local shop, my local nightclub, my local service provider. It affects my relationship with employers or people I work with or for because of the way they see me. And their duties and obligations towards me in law. It also affects the way everybody sees you in society. You get people pitying you, you get people feeling sorry for you, you get people making assumptions about your capabilities. You get people not being so nice. For example, one time or multiple times somebody told me that people like me belong at the bottom of the River Thames, which I think that's because of my visible disability. It it affects the way I play sport, every facet of, even maybe the way family and friends interact with me. Not always in a negative way, because obviously family and friends need to be aware how disabled and to accommodate that and support that in every aspect of life, even interaction. In that way, it means everything and nothing. It also shows how it's not about me and my medical condition that particularly makes me disabled. It's the way the outside world interacts with that.
Yeah, no, sorry for the I'm going to apologize on behalf of the horrible person that made the River Thames comment. But I think you're right in respect of, actually, if the world was made for somebody like you, you wouldn't be disabled, would you? And I think that's something that a lot of people forget. I don't know, it's hard. It's one of the things that I think you told me when we first met, which was disabled people are only disabled because their environment makes them disabled. And it really stuck with me. Yeah, I think given what you've said then, how do you feel about disability pride and what does it mean to you?
If people have been watching these episodes, they probably will be surprised by my answer, because I always get involved in the conversation. But I think, I am proud to be a disabled person, because it is part of my identity, because of the many different ways in which my interaction with the world is different because of my impairment, and being proud of the fact that regardless of all the difficulties, you still do what you can, you do what you want to do. You try and make an improvement in that environment. You try to make a change. That's me being proud of an individual. Well, as a community, a disabled community, I'm really proud of that, because it's so many awesome people in this community. I mean, not everyone is, but you can say that about any community. But yeah, we've got a fantastic range of people in our community with different experiences and different backgrounds and different understandings of the world, different understandings of disability. But we all have a common thing, and that's the way the world treats us in a different way because of our impairment. And despite that, many of us are either happy living our own lives, making our own business, and we're happy doing that, or other people are wanting to try and make a change on a systematic level, local level, or even on an individual interaction basis. And I think that's something to be proud of in terms of Disability Pride Month. I like it because it's an opportunity to talk about that. It's a reason for people to take up an initiative. We could have started with something at any time of the year, but we didn't during Prime. It's an opportunity to do something, or a bit of encouragement to do something. In terms of the common criticism about Prime Month, about commercial entities are less quick to pick up a banner, like with LGBT plus. I don't actually care about that, because much of what goes on in LGBT Pride Month is lip service, commercialisation, performative marketing. It's not really upsetting if only the people who are talking about disability rights are people who actually care about it, and I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. I think especially I don't mind listeners knowing. So personally, I'm a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, and I agree with you. I think that it's very commercialized. It doesn't feel very heartfelt. And actually, I think that there has been a noticeable difference with disability pride, quite frankly, because I think, like you said, the way that people engage with it and have engaged with it over the past month has shown that there is a genuine care for the cause. You kind of touched on this, but just some clarification for our lovely audience. Are you proud of being disabled?
Yes.
Excellent. Let's carry on. Did you want to elaborate, or are you happy just...
I am proud of all the individual things I mentioned, and I'm proud because of all the community things I mentioned.
Can I ask if you're comfortable saying, what is your impairment and how does it affect you?
I have cerebral palsy, often referred to as CP. I have a speech impairment, which will be quite obvious to the audience in the background. In the blur background, I'm sitting in a wheelchair, so I'm a wheelchair user.
Right.
Limited mobility, walking, yeah.
I was going to say, when you said about your speech impediment, for a second, I thought you were going to make a joke about your accent. FYI, Dan has done this before. And of course, there's a really awesome comedian, isn't there, with cerebral palsy, Rosie Jones, and she makes that joke. She's like, as you can tell from the way I speak, I am Northern. So, but yeah, no. So can I ask then, what does your particular profession, so for you, that would be being a barrister at the bar, what does that really involve?
Well, I mean, most of my career has been around equality, diversity, and inclusion. A bar is still quite new, even though it's always been a beginning of the end goal. In terms of EDI, it's been about engaging with organizations to work on solutions, practical solutions around how to remove barriers to disabled people. I don't do much around the philosophy around it, or honestly. You can tell from my answers, I'm keen on the philosophy. But I think practical solutions are important. And a lot of my work involves in legal profession. So I like to think of CGI being a bit of a pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid you have like law, equality laws, and then above that you've got the implementation of that law, including policies, and then on top of that you've got working practices, and then on top of that you've got individual people and the way they operate, and then on top of that you've got like individual. I think that's everything. And in there you can fit regulation depending on who you're working with. And then you see all these different layers of barriers and difficulties disabled people face. And then you can pick them apart on each level depending on who you're working with. So for example, if you're working with a BSB, as we both do, we will talk about how you can change regulation to make change, because that's what they're primarily responsible for. With a law firm, if you want to small professions, you look at policies, implementation of or working practices when individual people interact, they can talk with it with people and explain to people that there are actual practical ways you can solve a problem. I believe that disabled people can quite easily achieve and creating legal professions. Obviously, I would think that, but it's not based on some wishy-washy idealist concept. It's about practicality, what needs to be done, how to do it, and achieving the goal of a diverse legal profession. Not only around disability, but also LGBT people, women, ethnic minorities, people of colour, depending on people's preferred terminology, trans people. I would say that's important right now. How you can balance competing rights and these. I think that's important because when you have intersectionality or a multicultural society, there will be conflicts of rights, and I think we have to manage that conflict in a way that doesn't interfere with the dignity of either group in terms of a bar. Obviously, I'm a people barrister, so I am by the time this video goes out, I will be giving preparation in my first it's what we have it's public commercial construction and clinical law. I'm not giving names, but that's the broad concept. So we've experienced a wide range of practice areas recently. Looking forward to how I the opportunity to prove I can do a bit of everything. But I'm crime. I don't want to try crime. Criminal but lawyers are amazing, but it's a difficult career to navigate everything you can see on the news. And then in my first it's I've been doing a lot of shadowing, doing research, preparing information and documents, and helping my supervisors and getting feedback on them. In my second search, I'll be able to go to court by myself and work on interim applications and small matters. I'm really looking forward to. Well, what I like about this career, which I haven't experienced in preparation yet, but I know it's part of the bar because I do it with legal law centres and a fee representation unit. I like being able to help people solve a problem. I think that is fundamentally what we do. Yeah, if you're doing a bit of written advice or a bit of written advocacy situation, and then if you make that into written advice, you can use that information to put your client's best argument using the evidence available to you. And you get that from papers, you can get it from interviewing the client, talking to the client. And I really like that idea of helping people to escape a bad situation because, I mean, it might not be particularly personal. Well, if you got a barrister, well, it probably isn't an ideal situation. And then to be able to solve that is satisfying. It's particularly satisfying when it's somebody who can't afford to pay you. It is really rewarding, and I'm grateful to be given the opportunity to make a career out of helping people.
Absolutely.
Or organizations, companies, to carry on doing what they're doing and get and solve difficulties they are experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, then, are the biggest obstacles in your profession?
Well, yeah, because of the work we do and the work I've done, we could probably spend about 3 hours setting out the main obstacles. Because I could say you can set it out in a pyramid, you can go from the law all the way to the way workers interact with one another and the individual. So all those levels, the biggest obstacles. I'll start with my my career in education when I did my LB. I wasn't really too familiar with the duty to provide reasonable adjustments. And my adjustments in my first and second year were what I wanted them to be. But it wasn't really practical. Like each one of my law exams were 8 hours long. And according to the examiners, I couldn't see any deterioration in my work from beginning to end. Well, obviously, that can't be the case because by the time you get to the end of 8 hours, when you get to the 5 hour mark, you don't feel well, you feel awful, frankly, in being in the building for 8 hours or more. It can't be the case that there was no deterioration. However, feeling like that in bigger exams was hard. And that's because I wasn't really innovative around the support I was getting. And got to that point by simply giving me 100% at a time in 3 hours exams and then allowing 4 breaks in between. So it was a 6 hour exam, but by the time you taking a break here and there, it's reaching about 8 hours, and it wasn't really sustainable. I did okay. I mean, I got mainly tier one. But in my final year, we got a bit more innovative, and I was able to do 3/4, no, or 2/3 of the exam in the exam, and 1/3 as a written essay. And that's when my grades really improved because I went from consistently getting tier ones to getting first. I mean, maybe I don't think it's a coincidence that I performed better when I wasn't being subjected to 8 hour exams, even 4 hour exams, or maybe 5, and then an essay before or after. That was difficult, especially looking back, because if you take into account the way Queen Mary graded you, I was 1 mark away from the first. And if I got better reasonable adjustments earlier, I might have a little bit. Well, I'm confident I would have got extra mark. And that would have got me first. And because I always, I do have quite an elite mentality. I want to be the best at pretty much everything I do. It was important. People say you can do alright when it's in one, and you can. And it's a no indication of how good you are. Exams are not official construct isn't really effective on the real world or how talented you are. But when you're in a profession where you are up against the best and the brightest, you can't afford to be second fiddle. That was a bit difficult. Not only because of how difficult the exams were, but also how it impacts your CV when you're in a competitive world. Another we are we always come up. Another one is people saying yeah I think the bar's not for you. You might struggle. I mean, I think I hold their opinion, and maybe we disabled people should stop asking the question because you're inviting that negative response. And maybe you should believe in what you have to offer and work it out from there. But it is off-putting having members of a profession say it might not be for somebody like you. Basically, I got qualified to make that assessment of you. Um, and only applying an understanding of a non-disabled bar to you who even about 5 minutes out of that working even. So that's not indicative. The second one is you can whip around things and bark in the gaps. It needs a gap. A third difficulty is lack of representation in the profession when I was in education because I only knew one disabled barrister and then I knew two, and that was it for a while. I mean now everywhere we're on Twitter. We have the association, we have OBA, we have BGA. We're a lot easier to see now. And that's a good thing, but I sound really old, but back in my day, it wasn't like that. And now, in the profession, yeah, of course, a real problem because a building's culturing were free, accessible, and it were inaccessible, and then old buildings and good things going wrong. 85% on wheelchair accessible, and that's bad. Not only from a professional point of view. Well, if you take into account the rule of law and the idea that everybody's entitled to equal justice, if we can't get in the courtroom to argue your case or you're a client and you can't sit in the same courtroom as your representatives, the judge, the other parties, that's not equal justice. I've seen on the news disabled people being being given verdicts and sentences in criminal cases outside of the court. I've seen people having to wait outside until a barrister can come out and explain to them what happened inside the court. And now we have some online courts. That's not always accessible. People have less time to interact with their representatives. It's more difficult to understand what's going on. You can be put on mute so you can't get that understanding. I think we need to work on that. Not only for people like me who want to work in there, but I think if we really want to put our money where our mouth is, when we talk about equal justice and you have to have accessible courts. I think access to work is difficult because I think that can be quite demeaning because you have to put everything you can do in your job without a support worker, and you end up saying, I can't do any part of this job without a support worker. And then obviously that's demoralising, it's dehumanising, and I'm not quite sure a profession quite understands how impactful that is. Um, and we really need to get work on that. And I think moving forward, more issues will crop up, and I'll be able to talk about every time. But yeah, they're the main issues.
Yeah, no, I feel for you on the reasonable adjustments thing. I also got a mark off a first, so my gosh. Love that. I only had reasonable adjustments in the second year, no, third year, and my grades went up by 11%. So I completely agree, it's insane. It's, I always say to people, trying to get someone to sit an exam without a reasonable adjustment, or to go to work without a reasonable adjustment, is like asking a 100-meter Paralympic sprinter to run the race without their prosthetic limb. It's the same thing. You wouldn't ask them to do that, so why are you asking me or you to, like you said, sit for God only knows how many hours, putting ourselves through essentially a day's work of torture in order to do something that everyone else can quite easily do in under 3.
I mean, I think, to be honest, I think a 3-hour exam already constitutes a day's worth of torture. When that becomes 6 or 8,
it's too much.
I don't know how to decide that, and I think if you think about it, we do what we do because it fits the system, but you can only hold a attention span for about 45 minutes. That's the ideal length of a lesson. The other exams are totally opposite to that concept. Again, reflects. I mean, all we do before an exam is try hold as much information in our heads as possible, all of which is forgotten tables afterwards. I can't remember, I probably should go a bit about it, but I can't remember 25% of the bar course. I can find my way around the white box or a Blackstone criminal practice. I didn't need to sit the exam to be able to find my way around the book.
No, I agree. I agree.
In the political about exams. If I could work out how good people are, we have to do better exams that require climbing as much knowledge in as possible. I mean, I did very well at exams. I was 1 mark away from my first at uni. I got a distinction in my first master's degree. I got a distinction in my second master's degree. I got an outstanding in the bar course elements. I could give exams. It's not because they don't work for me. Well, it's got to be about way of assessing how good people are. Because it don't really tell you how much of a barrister I will be. Really. I mean, I know I'll be alright because I am getting skills, but I don't think I got them from exams, and that's even more important for disabled people.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, what have been the best and worst experiences in your career so far?
A base, a base was getting people was amazing. It really was. And I somewhere like being an Essex. It was completely unexpected. I mean, not, I'll explain. You apply for 5 years. Well, I applied for 5 years. You keep getting rejections, and I'm good with rejections. I think it's important to improving one's character, mm, resilience, and overall knowledge and skills. Because if you take it in the right way, you know where you're weak, and then you can address your weak points. Well, you do it for 5 years and you keep getting rejections, and for me, it got to a point where I wasn't really making any progress. Because quite early on, maybe in the second or third year of applying, I was a reserve at a really good campus. And then the year after, I was a reserve again at the same campus. And then I was a reserve at another really good campus. And you can't really get feedback on that because margins are so tight. It's hard to say when you need to improve. Um, I did find areas of improvement. For example, I was acutely aware that I was monolingual at the time. Now I know British Sign Language Q level Q. And that was something I realised I needed to do. People I'm competing with are multilingual, and I need to address that. Anyway, um, and when you do it for so long and you're not making progress, it's difficult. And then in the last year I applied, I got a reserve at 89 Essex, and that was surprising because 39 didn't want to interview me in the previous application. I can, well, my written application wasn't good enough. Really, in according to our criteria in the previous years. And it all came out of nowhere. It wasn't a shame as I thought, yeah, that's the one I'm gonna get people with that. It was a little frankly. So it was a very, I mean, and then I got an email saying, yeah, you're fifth on the reserve list. And I'm like, yeah, by the way, I thought, oh crap, I'm on the reserve. It's again, and it's ain't going nowhere. I emailed my friend and my mentor, working with you now. I'm a bit fed up of being a reserve. Maybe we could do a private preparation, maybe in different like a CPH or army to get a practicing certificate. Not that I was particularly keen on those options, but what I want people is I want a practicing certificate. I got an email. I gave like a thing, first and that's when you get a bit nervous because like okay, each question, right? All you need is one more drop out or somebody to get people elsewhere. And for whatever reason, that's a better option for them. And then, I actually sent them an email, and I thought about it for about an hour. I sent them an email, and I just said, if you give me the opportunity, I will prove, yeah, I'll prove myself. and then I got the offer on a Monday morning, and it was just it is a very surreal thing because you get used to going through this really difficult application process every year. It becomes a much a part of your annual calendar as Christmas. I mean, frankly, I probably spend many a Christmas working on my application forms. It becomes entrenched in your annual calendar. And then when you get it and you have that offer, it was so surreal. Yeah, and the second thing was my master's degree. I think that was well, my first master's was a good moment because I didn't need to do a master's. It wasn't part of the plan. Getting an LB was part of the plan. And like my A levels, when I got my A levels, I got good results, yeah, but it was part of the plan. It was what I expected. It was part of the journey. That was a bit different because it wasn't part of the plan, and when I got out, I felt good to get a decision to kind of make up for being one mark away in my LB. And the third thing is, yeah, getting my second master's and my bar course. I really like the bar course is amazing. I know it gets a bit of a bad rap for not being effective or practice. But yeah, I met really cool people. I mean, I met you, I met really, really, I met really good friends on that course, more friends and then the other course I've been on. And I like that, and I like doing the advocacy. I like doing the practical parts of being a barrister or agriculture. And I have a fantastic tutor. Well, I mean, all my tutors were great, but my personal tutor was amazing. And I think she kind of got me. She got where I was coming on when I was not happy about lift being broke or some access issue or some disability issue. Like a couple of folks she got it. I appreciate that and she still helps me now, which I'm grateful for. And then obviously in my paper on my master's I got 92%, which obviously I'm happy about. I kind of put my heart and soul into that paper and to get a good mark for it. That was good. I haven't actually, I mean, apart from the obvious acceptable disability, I haven't, I've had a good career, and I think I can say it being a point where it's been bad. As all the things I overcame or I will overcome. Well, looking back at my career, it's always been a constant normality, even with everything else. I'm grateful for that, really.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think I mean, such triumphs, really. I mean, it's like, well, it is, don't be silly. I mean, it's disabled and proud, okay? And we're allowed to be disabled, and we're also allowed to be proud of our own achievements and proud of other people's achievements. So you'll just have to sit there and take it, mister. But but that takes me on to the next question, which is what advice would you give to those aspiring for the similar path that you've gone down?
The first thing would be don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Obviously, all information is valuable. Some more valuable than others. But we put off by some member of the profession saying you can't do it, and not, especially and not qualified to make that statement. And probably not aware of reasonable adjustments, changing work practices, in different ways people can get the job done. And second thing will be to do it for the right reasons, do it because you know it's for you, do it because you want to help people, do it because you want to contribute to society, especially if you're disabled, because our community, people in our community unfortunately don't get an equal voice. And if you get to a point where you're in coaching distance to the bar, you're already a pretty good advocate, right? So use advocacy and make a difference in your job. And third one, we always be authentic. Obviously, you know, I have a professional face and I have a normal face. I hope you would say, not that much different to one another, but obviously you need to be different because when you're a professional, you're a professional, and you ought to be behaving in a professional manner. As a barrister, you are under an obligation to always act with honesty and integrity, so do that, be respectful. You don't have to agree with everyone, and you can challenge what you need to challenge. That's part of the course of being disabled. Obviously, sometimes you need to be a bit picky, and that's also part of the course. But when you can be respectful, and you'll be yourself, because every being respectful is compatible with being yourself. But I have some, yeah, do what you think is right, always. Sometimes you get it wrong, and forgive yourself when you do get it wrong, because we all get that wrong. You all act on impulse, you all act on limiting information available to us on emotion, and emotions can be suppressed. But obviously, I have an important part in regulating our behaviour to protect us and other people. Be yourself. The fourth thing will be reach out to people like us, people like Oba, people like Bigaba. We're here to help make this profession better. We could always do with more people in it, more people could volunteer, more people could support our campaigns, more people could raise our visibility. You're always welcome when you're disabled or not. Our membership requires that you are disabled, but you could be an ally. Yeah, join our causes. I mean, you can't take our voice away, you can't substitute our voice, but if you're an ally, you can amplify our voices, and that's important.
Thanks for that, Daniel. What do you think the key issues are in disability rights at the moment?
I think the main one is the cost of living crisis. I know it affects everyone, but given that disabled people are more likely to be getting employment or being blocked from accessing education, and we're more at risk of being in poverty, and we experience a pay gap. It amplifies that difficulty. On top of that, even if you're not earning an income, you're still expected to make a contribution to your care package. Even if you're on social security, you get assessed as being capable of providing a care contribution. I'm not quite sure the logic of the government giving you essential funding for essential living, and then the local authorities say, well, that's too much, you can afford to make a contribution. We better not say much more about that. But you see how, all factors increase our vulnerability to a cost of living crisis. If you have mobility impairments, you're not moving around so often, and that means you're more likely to get cold, and that means you may want to put the heating on more. If you were able to move around electrically. And of course, there are impairments that mean, or circulation, and directly make you cold, or directly mean that you need to put a heating on. And it can be, I find it very difficult to put a girl on. So if I can avoid putting a girl on, I will. And I'll probably go out in the rain in a jumper because putting a girl on is too difficult. Or, I like it when it's warm now because if I'm working from home, I can just wear a t-shirt at best. And then I'm comfortable, I can move, I don't have to put anything on when I go out. Or if I needed, if it was cold outside, I'll probably need to put a heating on when I get back because I go to a shop with a t-shirt or a jumper or whatever. And then you have things like medical equipment. I have to charge my wheelchair every night. And I might be wrong, but that probably uses more electricity than anything else in my flat. When I visit my family, when I put in my wheelchair, he start me to go crazy. So, you got that kind of thing, you got ice, you got breathing apparatus, or other equipment. We need to sort this out. We need to provide people with enough money to survive, which is survive this cost of living crisis, because it is a real risk to disabled people, even more so than everybody else, in my opinion. And then we need whoever a new PM will be. I mean, it won't do anything because it should not even come up yet. Disabled people. I have to do something, and then that kind of links into disabled people getting enough financial support anyway. We have more costs than everybody else. On average, we spend 1,500 or more than anybody else to compensate for additional costs of being disabled. PIP or disability living allowance personal independence, including getting nature, covering that. And, you know, like, if, I mean, my opinions are already written academically, so I'm not making a political statement, but it's a matter of fact and it's a matter of law, even the courts have answered the question about PIP. It was, it was inadequately designed, it was poorly designed, and now people have incredibly long waiting times. And on top of that, a very high percentage of those are appealed or successful. I mean, when I last got the figure, it was more than 75%, and it probably still is. It's been consistent for years, and it's I think the evidence suggests it's an unnecessary delay in the case law, in the appeals. We need to do something about that. And then obviously we need to make sure disabled people getting equal pay. Pay disabled equally for equal jobs work. I get known people in Parliament saying it's okay to pay disabled people less than the minimum wage. Why is that? I mean, again, because it's illegal, but it is a disability pay gap, and it ought to be addressed, because if you have money, you have more equality, you have more freedom. I mean, it shouldn't be that way, but we do live in a capitalist society, and that's the way it runs. I don't mean to be sensationalist, but one journalist, I think, stated quite a few years ago now, over 100,000 disabled people's lives are being lost because of inadequate funding, and that's not on. It's all narrative around COVID about how every life matters. If that is the case, then you have to do something about that. A fourth thing is, we need to stop seeing people as being inferior, because that affects everything. That's why buildings are inaccessible, because it's not as important that we can get in, or we can have equal employment status. It's why services aren't equal. It's why employment isn't equal. It's why disabled people have difficulties having relationships with people, because disabled people are the same, well, not even the same with your best friend. You're always getting, how will you provide for, I mean, if you're a disabled man, you often get asked the question, does it work? And always assumptions made by us that we can't fulfill these important aspects of life having an impact on us people and our aspirations. I think calling it in terms of solutions, it's always important to provide solutions to a problem. In terms of adequate funding, if you answer to anything, in relation to the cost of living crisis, cut away all the nonsense that stop people from accessing the money, providing enough money, and don't make the system overly burdensome. You can say that about PIP and financial support. You can say in terms of giving people protections, we need to stop the way the media portrays disabled people as a joke. I mean, there are positive role models of TV leaders, but I mean, almost every bad guy in every film has a facial disfigurement or some sort of disability. And not always a bad guy. And to be honest, I'd rather be seen as a bad guy than the pitiful guy which we also got seen as immediate portrayal of a way which talking about my government. I talk about that in my article in the City Law Review. And I'm not trying to make over political statements. It's all evidence. You can just learn to communicate with people. Even if it's difficult because of an impairment, there will be ways you can do it on different levels. Communication is so beautiful and complex. There are many ways of doing it. We communicate more when we're not talking, and we do when we are. So you can connect with people regardless of what impairments they may have. You gotta be fighting. I mean, I know it's that people always want to know good at work. I always say, well, don't be afraid to ask questions. Oh, well, you might want to work up for hours. Yeah, keep it simple. Go start off with that question. Go start off with what happened to you. Go start off with when you're born that way. I mean, you always jumping up and keep on. I mean, nowadays, I get a bit picky when I get asking questions like, if people say, what's wrong with you? I ain't saying nothing. And then, obviously, you rephrase the question, what you wrong with you? I say nothing, what's wrong with you? If I'm moving forward, but obviously, I always answer the question of good at work. That's the question I always ask. But you want to work up to it. You'll be open to learning about people, and then you will change your perception of people.
Yeah, I can think of lots of things that are wrong with you, to be fair, Daniel. But we'll we'll leave that at that. But then you could think of lots of things that are wrong with me, so I better be quiet. So yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think the perception of disabled people is a massive problem. I think, and I don't know about you, but I get quite frustrated because, the number of times you'll say to someone, oh, the fact that our villains, for example, always have some sort of limb or facial disfigurement, and people be like, oh, well, just stop trying to make a thing out of it. And it's like, we're not the ones making a thing out of it. You guys are. I'm sick and tired of like going to the movies and seeing the same thing over and over and over again. If you want to stop making it an issue, stop doing it. It's that simple. But yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think that the solutions that you offered are excellent suggestions. If only they were taken on by people in power. But there we go. Maybe one day. That's what we're fighting for, though, isn't it? That's the whole point. That's the whole point of campaigns like this. But so then, with all of that in mind, from your perspective, what does the future hold for disabled people?
Obviously, we always want to enrich views on the positive level, and that's what I always claim that in the interviews. But I don't know what the future holds. I don't think it's a positive future, not only for disabled people, but people in general. We we're in the middle of a heat wave. We're right on the verge of climate crisis. Everything, I predict things will get unpredictable very soon, and that will have an impact on our resources. The number of refugees will go up, and obviously foreign policy isn't welcoming of that. Yeah, so our resources are going to be stretched significantly, and in life will become more uncomfortable. And with the way the world works, I think disabled people's rights will be the first to go. Because we haven't even got to our pinnacle yet. When you compare it to women, people of colour, LGBT people, we're already behind. And because our equality requires a change in the system that goes beyond not being racist or not being homophobic, or transphobic or biphobic, panphobic, yeah, sexist, because our equality demands significant systematic change. I feel with the idea of survival of the fittest, I think our rights will be reversed to be sacrificed for what people will call the greater good. It's a lot of right, unfortunately. That's why climate emergency is a disability rights issue. I think, it's controversial, but I'll be quite happy to make it one of our objectives. I think all disability organizations should make it one of their objectives, because I think that's what will happen. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that the people who say it's all part of the Earth's natural cycle are right. Even though the evidence isn't supporting that. I hope my view that disabled people's rights will be reversed to go each along. I hope in the midst of climate emergencies, disabled people's welfare will be at the centre of a conversation, even though it probably will be, never is. And I hope we find a way through it, because the whole existence of the human race depends on it. And therefore, the only living, the only intelligent life in the universe depends on it.
Well, yeah, no, I think you raised some really good points there. I think the environment problem obviously isn't just like national issue, it's a global issue as well. I mean, I think one of the things that people often forget about disability rights is that, you know, we obviously within the UK, like we've made our own steps in many regards, but globally, the story isn't quite the same. And, you know, we're talking about a global crisis that's going to impact those who are marginalized most, and disabled people make up a pretty decent proportion of poorer demographics. And I think that it's something that we really need to start working together to resolve. Otherwise, I mean, to put in other words, we'll be screwed. I agree with you. But I think it's really positive that we do have lots of people that are talking about it, you know, children nowadays as well. Well, not children, well, yeah, the kids, too old to call myself that now, but like, you know, you see on TikTok and like all of the they're very conscious about the environment issue, and I also think that they're a lot more conscious about disability issues. the ableist language, for example, that was called out in one of Beyonce's recent songs, and also a couple of weeks prior in Lizzo's songs, you know. So we do have a generation of people who are holding people to account, and we do have people who are responding to those criticisms in a positive light. And I think if we can continue on that trajectory, then hopefully things won't be as negative as they could be. But I struggle to see the hope in things. But I guess we just have to keep on trying. Every turning point can be turned around. That's I have a strong faith in that. But thank you so much, Dan, for your contributions today. I have learned a lot. I'm sure that our audience has as well. I would like to say thank you for letting me host. I had a lovely time. And we at the ADL have lots of, we're going to continue this kind of format, but in a podcast form. So keep up to date with that and look out for it. And yeah, we will see you, hear you. You will hear us again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.